My name is Ava Bennett. I'm 27 years old. 3 years ago, my parents locked me out of the family home during a blizzard while I was 8 months pregnant. Then they told everyone I had run away. 6 months later, they stood in front of my husband and begged him for $10 million. And the worst part? They didn't even recognize me when I walked back into their lives. I know that sounds crazy. Trust me, if someone had told me this story before it happened, I would have laughed and said, yeah, right, no freaking way. But sometimes real life is so brutal it sounds fake. And sometimes the people who destroy you are the same people who raised you. Before I tell you how everything fell apart, tell me where you're watching from, because this story starts on the coldest night of my life. And it ends with 3 people losing everything they spent decades building. The night my family abandoned me, the temperature was 12 degrees below zero. Snow was falling so hard I could barely see the streetlights. My fingers were numb. My cheeks felt like they were being sliced open by tiny knives. And I was standing barefoot on the front porch of my childhood home, begging. Actually begging. Mom, please. My voice cracked. Please open the door. Nothing. I pounded again, harder. Mom! Through the frosted glass, I could see shadows moving. I knew they were inside. I knew they could hear me. Then I heard laughter. Not strangers, not neighbors, my family, my mother, my father, my younger sister, laughing. The front porch light flicked on, the curtain moved, and there she was, my sister, Madison, 24 years old, perfect hair, perfect makeup, perfect life. The favorite, always the favorite. She stared at me through the glass. Then she smiled. Not a nice smile, not a guilty smile. The kind of smile you give someone when you've already won, when you've finally gotten rid of them. She lifted her phone, took a picture, and walked away. I remember standing there thinking, this can't be real. This has to be some misunderstanding. Families don't do this. Parents don't throw out their pregnant daughters, right? Wrong, because my family wasn't normal, not even close. The truth is, my parents loved Madison. They tolerated me. There's a difference, a huge difference. And if you've ever been the unfavorite child, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Growing up, Madison got everything. I got explanations. When Madison wanted horseback riding lessons, she got horseback riding lessons. When I wanted piano lessons, Dad said money was tight. 2 months later, he bought Madison a new SUV. When Madison graduated college, my parents threw a party with over 200 guests. When I graduated, my mother handed me a card and said, "Congratulations." No party, no cake, no photos, nothing. I spent years trying to earn their love. Straight A's, volunteering, working part-time jobs, helping around the house, being polite, being grateful, being perfect. It never mattered, because the game was rigged before it started. Madison was the golden child. I was the backup plan, the spare tire, the daughter they kept around because getting rid of me would look bad. For a long time, I accepted it. Then I met Ethan, and everything changed. I was 23, working at a small bookstore downtown. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, this guy walked in carrying a coffee and 3 law textbooks. He immediately dropped all of them. The coffee exploded across the floor. The books scattered everywhere. And he looked at me and said, "Well, that's embarrassing." I laughed, for the first time in weeks, maybe months. His smile was ridiculous, the kind that made you smile back without meaning to. We talked for 20 minutes, then an hour. Then he came back the next day, And the day after that. 3 months later, we were dating. 1 year later, he proposed. And that's when my parents decided they hated him. Because Ethan wasn't rich. At least not then. He was a public defender. Smart. Kind. Honest. The kind of guy who'd help an old lady carry groceries without expecting praise. My parents hated that. They wanted status, connections, money, appearances. Ethan cared about people. To them, that was weakness. At dinner one night, my father leaned back in his chair and asked, "So, what's the long-term plan?" Ethan smiled. "What do you mean?" "Money," Dad said it bluntly. "What exactly are you bringing to this marriage?" The room went silent. I felt my stomach drop. But Ethan never got angry. He just shrugged. "I plan on building a life with Ava." Dad laughed. Actually laughed, like Ethan had told a joke. Madison joined in. Mom smiled into her wine glass. And that's when I realized something. They weren't judging him. They were judging me, because I had chosen someone good instead of someone impressive. 2 years later, I became pregnant, and things got worse. Much worse. My parents acted like the baby was some kind of inconvenience. My mother hated that I wasn't married into wealth. Dad hated that Ethan wasn't becoming a corporate lawyer. Madison hated that attention was shifting away from her. And attention was oxygen to Madison. Without it, she couldn't breathe. By the 7th month of my pregnancy, she had become unbearable. Everything was a competition. Everything. If I posted an ultrasound picture, she posted professional photos. If Ethan bought baby furniture, she announced a luxury vacation. If someone congratulated me, she found a way to redirect the conversation back to herself. It was exhausting. Then came the engagement. Not mine, hers. Madison got engaged to Blake Holloway, the son of a billionaire real estate developer. And suddenly my parents acted like they had won the lottery, because in their minds, they had. For months, all they talked about was Madison's wedding, Madison's future, Madison's house, Madison's ring, Madison, Madison, Madison. Meanwhile, I was 8 months pregnant, barely sleeping, working until maternity leave started, trying to survive. Then, everything exploded. It happened during Sunday dinner, the last dinner I ever had in that house. Dad announced a toast. Everyone raised their glasses. He stood, smiling, proud, to Madison and Blake. Everyone cheered. Then he said something I'll never forget. "To this family finally has a future worth celebrating." The room went silent. My hand froze around my water glass. Even Ethan looked shocked. I stared at my father, waiting for him to realize what he'd said, waiting for him to correct himself. He didn't. Madison smirked. Mom smiled, like nothing unusual had happened. Finally, I said, "What about my baby?" Dad looked annoyed, like I was interrupting. "Ava," his voice was cold, "you know that's different." Different. Not equal, not important. Different. Something broke inside me. Not dramatically, not loudly, just quietly, like a thread snapping. And once it snapped, nothing was ever the same again. I stood up, grabbed my coat, and left. Ethan followed. The next morning, my mother called, not to apologize, not to check on me, to demand that I stop being dramatic. That was her favorite word, dramatic. If I cried, dramatic. If I disagreed, dramatic. If I defended myself, dramatic. Eventually, I hung up, and for 3 weeks, I didn't speak to them. It should have ended there, but it didn't, because Madison wasn't finished. Not even close. 3 weeks later, she accused me of stealing from her, and that accusation changed everything. For the first time in my life, my family looked scared. Not angry, not arrogant, not superior. Scared. The fraud investigation exploded across every news channel in the country. My brother Ethan's Senate campaign collapsed overnight. Sponsors disappeared, friends vanished, business partners suddenly claimed they barely knew him. Funny how that works. When people think you're powerful, they're glued to your side. The second they smell blood, they're gone faster than free beer at a tailgate party. I watched everything from my small condo overlooking the harbor, a condo I had bought quietly, a condo nobody in my family knew existed. I sat on my balcony with a cup of coffee while reporters camped outside my father's mansion. The mansion looked different now, smaller somehow. Power has a strange effect. It makes buildings look bigger than they really are. Then, one rainy Tuesday morning, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Something told me not to. Hello? Silence. Then breathing. Heavy breathing. Finally, a voice. Ava. My stomach dropped. Dad. For a second, I was 20 years old again, desperate for approval, hungry for love. Then reality returned. What do you want? His voice sounded old. Not older. Old. Like somebody had taken sandpaper to his soul. We need to talk. No. Ava. No. I hung up. 30 seconds later, he called again. Then again. Then again. 23 missed calls. I blocked the number. 3 hours later, Ethan showed up at my office. Security stopped him downstairs. He still managed to send a message. Just 3 words. Please help us. I laughed. Actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable. Help us? The people who spent 3 years trying to destroy me were asking for help? The universe has a twisted sense of humor. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong, because 2 weeks later I received a package. No return address. Inside was a photograph. An old photograph. Black and white, faded around the edges. 3 people standing together. A young man, a young woman, and a baby. The baby had my eyes. At the bottom, someone had written a date, 1989, and beneath it, not Charles Mitchell's daughter. I stared at that photograph for nearly an hour, my hands shaking, my heart pounding. Then another envelope slipped out. A letter. Only 6 words. Ask your grandmother the truth. No signature, nothing else. Just those words. The truth. I hadn't spoken to my grandmother in almost 4 years. The last time we'd seen each other, she testified against me. She looked me in the eyes and called me greedy. I never forgave her. But now, I needed answers. 2 days later, I drove to her retirement home. She looked shocked when she opened the door. Older, smaller, fragile, like life had finally caught up. Ava? We need to talk. The moment she saw the photograph, her face lost all color. That's when I knew. Whatever this was, it was real. She sat down slowly, her hands trembling. Then she started crying. Not polite tears, ugly tears, the kind people carry for decades. I prayed this day would never come. I didn't speak. I couldn't, because something inside me already knew. My entire life had been built on a lie, and I was about to hear it. The truth came out in pieces, slow, painful. 30 years earlier, my grandfather had an affair. Not a fling, not a mistake, a relationship. The woman became pregnant. A daughter was born, my biological mother. Years later, she died in a car accident.
I was 6 years old when it happened. My grandfather brought me into the family. Officially, I became Charles Mitchell's adopted daughter. Unofficially, nobody wanted me. Not Dad, not Mom, not Ethan. I wasn't family. I was an obligation, a responsibility, a reminder of Grandpa's mistake. Every cold look, every insult, every moment of rejection suddenly made sense. I wasn't imagining it. They truly never loved me, because to them, I wasn't one of them. I sat there, unable to breathe, 27 years old, and I didn't know who I was. Grandma sobbed. "He loved you, Ava." "Grandpa, he always loved you." That broke me. Not the betrayal, not the lie, the fact that the only person who truly loved me was gone. I cried all the way home, the kind of crying that empties your lungs, the kind that hurts. For 3 days, I ignored the world. No phone, no emails, nothing. Then the knock came. 3 sharp knocks. I opened the door and froze. My entire family stood there. Dad, Mom, Ethan, all 3. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then I noticed something. They looked destroyed. Dad had lost weight. Mom's hands shook. Ethan looked exhausted. Not one of them looked powerful anymore. "Ava," Dad said quietly, "we need your help." There it was again. Help. I folded my arms. Why? Mom started crying, immediately, like she'd rehearsed it. "The company is gone." I said nothing. The investigations froze everything. Still nothing. Ethan stepped forward. For the first time in his life, he looked uncertain. "We owe money." "How much?" Silence. Then Dad answered. $8 million. $8 million. I almost laughed again. 40 million started this war. Now they needed 8 million to survive. The irony was beautiful. "Why would I help you?" Nobody answered, because there wasn't a good answer. Dad finally lowered his head. "We were wrong." Too late. Mom cried harder. "We made mistakes." Mistakes? Leaving me emotionally abandoned my whole life wasn't a mistake. Trying to destroy me wasn't a mistake. Mistakes happen once. What they did happened for decades. Then Ethan shocked me. My perfect brother, my golden child, dropped to his knees. Actually dropped. Actually begged. "Ava, please." The room went silent. I stared at him. The guy who spent his whole life looking down on me, begging, tears in his eyes. For the first time ever, he looked human. Not special, not superior, just human. And broken. "We're going to lose everything." I looked at him for a long moment, then at Dad, then Mom, and something unexpected happened. The anger disappeared. Not completely, but enough, because suddenly I realized something. They were already punished. Look at them. The mansion was gone, the company was gone, the money was gone, the reputation was gone, their future was gone. What else was left? I could crush them, destroy them completely, but then what? Would that bring Grandpa back? Would that erase the loneliness? Would that heal the wounds? No, it wouldn't. Revenge got me here, but it couldn't take me further. So I asked one question. If I help you, what happens next? Dad swallowed hard. We start over. The old man standing before me wasn't the father I grew up fearing. That man was gone. This was just a tired old guy carrying decades of regret. For the first time, I felt sorry for him. Not because he deserved it, because hate is exhausting, and I was tired. So tired. I walked to the window, looked out at the ocean, thought about Grandpa, thought about the little girl who spent years trying to earn love, thought about the woman I'd become. Then I turned around. I'll pay the debt. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Mom covered her mouth. Ethan stared. Dad looked stunned. But one word, the room froze. You never contact me again. Tears rolled down Mom's face. I continued. You never ask me for anything again. Silence. You leave this house today, and we become strangers. Dad's eyes filled with tears. Real tears. Not manipulation. Not performance. Real regret. He nodded, slowly. I understand. And for the first time in my life, I think he actually did.
The money transferred 3 days later. $8 million. Just like that. The debt disappeared. So did they. I never saw them again. 2 years passed. Then 3. Life moved on. I started my own company. Smaller. Honest. The way Grandpa would have wanted. One afternoon, I visited his grave, something I do every year. The wind was gentle, the sky was blue. For a long time, I sat there quietly. Then I smiled, because I finally understood what he'd tried to teach me. Money reveals people. It doesn't change them. It reveals them. $40 million revealed my family's greed. $8 million revealed my freedom, and freedom was worth more than every dollar combined. As I stood to leave, I placed my hand on his headstone. Thanks, Grandpa. The breeze moved through the trees, soft, warm, almost like an answer. Then I walked away, not angry, not bitter, not broken, just free. Because the greatest revenge isn't making people suffer. It's building a life so beautiful that their betrayal becomes a footnote in your story. And that's exactly what I did. The end.